So you're a landlord in Cambridge and Somerville, you own some property, you're thinking of selling, but you're terrified of paying hundreds of thousands or even potentially over $1 million in capital gains tax and depreciation recapture. If you're in this position, you're one of many clients that I run into every single month, but I have good news for you. There is a solution and it's called the 1031 exchange. In today's video, I'm gonna break down exactly what a 1031 exchange is, how you use it, and the basics of a 1031 exchange. If you guys don't know me, my name is Sage Jankwitz. I am a real estate broker working primarily in Cambridge and Somerville. I believe in an investment-centric approach. I've closed over 500 transactions in over 6 years, and I'm excited to get going on this. Two things before I get into the video. The first is please make sure you watch to the very, very end. I'm going to drop a totally free 1031 exchange ebook. So at the very end, I will share details on how to get that book. It goes into a lot more detail. Again, this video, I'm going to cover a complete breakdown of the basics, but there's a lot more complicated parts to 1031 exchange that you definitely want to understand. So I'll share instructions on how to get that at the end of the video. And then secondarily, a 1031 exchange fundamentally is a tax move. And so while I very much am involved in transactions when it comes to 1031, I get the proper vendors in place for you. I help structure deals to make sure those happen. You must chat with a tax advisor to understand implications and to make sure you're following everything to a T. Don't just rely on my YouTube video or any YouTube video for that matter. So you must get proper advice. All right, let's get into it. So before we get into what is a 1031 exchange, you really need to understand why you may even want to consider a 1031 exchange. There's basically two pieces to this. The first, which you're probably familiar with, is capital gains tax. So let's say you buy a property for $500,000. You then want to sell a property. You think you're going to get $1 million. The gain there is $500,000. So that $500,000 gain, you're going to pay capital gains tax on, which is going to probably be 20-25% or so. On a $500,000 gain, you know, that's well over $100,000. That's a lot of money. So that's the first piece. And then the second is something called depreciation recapture. So I'm going to keep this really simple. I'm not going to get too deep down the depreciation rabbit hole here, but if you own an investment property, IRS gives you a write-off known as depreciation. It's based off of the actual property itself, and it's broken down over a number of years. For most properties, assuming, you know, about $1 million multifamily, two-family property in Somerville, to keep things simple, you're probably getting about a 20 to 30,000-ish write-off on any sort of gains you made each year from your rental income. So what happens is the IRS says when you sell that property, they want that back. So it's called depreciation recapture. Again, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, but you can pay a substantial amount in depreciation recapture, especially if you've owned it property for a very long period of time. So those are the two primary drivers as to why you may consider a 1031 exchange. Now let's get into what a 1031 exchange is. A 1031 exchange, it sounds very complicated, but it's basically the actual tax code that the IRS set out, tax code 1031. And what a 1031 exchange allows you to do as the seller is you can actually defer both the property gain, that is the capital gain that I talked about, as well as the depreciation recapture. So the next question I often get asked is who can do a 1031 exchange? So the next question I often get asked is who can do this? Can anyone do a 1031 exchange? Well, first of all, the property has to be in the United States. You have to use the property in a trade or business or an investment. For most people watching this video and most people that I work with, it's going to be an investor. So it must be an investment property. It cannot be your primary home. If you have a primary home, you cannot do a 1031 exchange. The next question I get asked is what about the actual property? What can I do? And the answer is it can basically be anything. It could be residential, it could be commercial, it could be industrial. You could have a small studio condo that's an investment, or you could have a mega skyscraper in New York City. It really doesn't matter. You can even have a piece of land. So let's say you have a piece of land, there's nothing on it. You can actually 1031 that, and all these different types of property types of land, you can 1031 into one or multiple properties that again can be anything. So you could take one skyscraper and buy 100 single families. You could package up 100 single families, sell them and put them into one skyscraper, and anything your imagination can come up with. The next thing that's really important. So a lot of clients, when they're doing these 1031 exchanges, they ultimately want to pay nothing in capital gains or depreciation recapture. If you're in that boat, you need to understand the greater or equal idea. And so what this means is, as an example, you buy a 500K two-family in Somerville, you then sell that property for $1 million. The new property that you buy must be greater than or equal to the property you just sold. So if you sold the property for $1 million, the new property you buy should be $1 million or more. And if it's less than $1 million, there's going to be a difference there. I'm not going to go too far down this road, but that idea is called boot, and you'd actually have to pay taxes on it. So if the goal is to pay no taxes, just make sure that the new property that you buy is greater than or equal to the property or combination of properties that you sell. Now, in order for a 1031 exchange to be executed properly, there's a number of rules you need to follow. I'm not going to get too into the weeds, but I'm going to talk on a high level at sort of the key things that you need to really think about. And if you don't follow these rules, to be clear, the IRS will not acknowledge that you pulled off a 1031 and you will have to pay all taxes. So it's super critically important that you do this right. Now, there's two timing pieces here that you need to think about. The first is what's called the ID timeline. So you have 45 days to identify the property or properties that you will be purchasing with the 1031 exchange. Now, this timeline starts the day the property that you own closes. So if you have a two-family in Somerville, goes under agreement, you can start looking for properties. The day that property that you sold is closed and on record, the clock starts. And from that day forward, you have 45 days to identify the property or properties that you will ultimately buy. And that includes weekends, that includes holidays. You know, if there's Christmas, if there's Hanukkah, if there's a weekend, all those days count towards the 45 days. You don't get a pause for anything. So keep that in mind. It starts the day it closes. That's not to say that you can't start searching while your property is listed that you're selling, while it's under agreement, while things are being negotiated. The second important time frame is the idea of the exchange period. This is the time from when the property you're selling closes till when the new property you buy closes. And this time frame is 180 days. And similar to the ID period, it starts the day your property closes. So again, if we have a two-family in Somerville, it closes. The day it closes, you have 180 days for the new property or properties you buy to actually close and be on record. If it's 181 days, unfortunately, you haven't followed the rules and you get none of the benefits. So it's extremely important that it's 180 days. And again, holidays and weekends will count towards this. And another thing that I've seen some people get confused about, the ID period is wrapped into 180 days, meaning it's not 45 days to ID and then 180 days. The 45 days is part of the 180 day period. So you have 180 days from the day you close to close on the new property or properties. Now, in addition to the 45-day ID period, there's actually a number of different rules in terms of identifying new properties for the 1031 exchange to buy. Now, I'm not going to go into all of them. I'm just going to talk about the most common one that the vast majority of people use, and that's called the 3-property rule. And that basically says you can choose any 3 properties you want to identify in that 45-day identification period. What's nice about this rule is there's no limitations on value amount. You know, each of those 3 properties could be less than or more than the property that's in question. Another thing that's nice about D rules in general is that if you choose, say, these 3 properties and for some reason one of them isn't going to work out after you look into it more, you can remove that from the 3 and you can actually add a new one. So you can swap them in during this 45-day period. So it's the most simple of the 3 rules. It's the one that most people tend to use. In another video, I can get into this in more detail. And then at the end, the ebook has all the details as well. So that's sort of the high level basics without going down too many rabbit holes with 1031 exchanges. But I want to end on just a couple quick notes here around the 1031 exchange. First, the 1031 exchange can be kind of complex if you don't know what you're doing. And there's a lot of components and different ways and directions you can go with a 1031 exchange. I haven't even talked about in this video, for example, what a qualified intermediary is, which is something that you'll absolutely need. I haven't talked about the fact that there's actually multiple ID rules. We only talked about one in this video. I haven't talked about the fact that there's multiple exchange types. Most people are only familiar with the forward exchange. There's also a lot of strategies about how you can utilize the 1031 from an investment perspective to have the best gains. The bottom line, though, is that it's critically important that you work with a real estate professional that actually knows what they're doing around these things. And there's a lot of other real estate transactions where if you work with kind of a crummy real estate agent, you may actually end up okay as long as you're focusing in on the right area and right general properties. But with a 1031 exchange, the stakes, in my opinion, are just simply too high. If you don't follow the 1031 exchange rules properly, if you don't have a strong strategy in place for how you list the property and how you identify new properties and a network of buyers and sellers that can help make this transaction happen smoothly, you can very easily get into one of 2 problems, which I see all the time. The first problem that can come up is that basically the timing is such where it gets messed up and the rules aren't followed. And if if the rules aren't followed, then you don't get the benefit. And if you've already sold your first property, you can't identify new property and time just runs out, or you run out of time, or you don't screw something up and don't do it quite right, generally you are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost equity, because that gain is gone in the form of property taxes and depreciation recapture that's going to the IRS. And for some of my clients that have owned properties for 20, 30, 40 years, it's a very large sum of money and the stakes are very high. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I see that happens when brokers don't properly execute these transactions and get the timing right is that the person who's selling their property, now looking to buy a new property, can get in a situation where their back's against the wall, time's running out, and they end up overpaying substantially for a property that they never should have bought or would have bought in the first place. You don't want to be that person. So the way that you structure these transactions is extremely important. So if you are someone who you have a property and you owned it for a long time, maybe you moved to another part of the country, maybe you're trying to get into a property that's lower stress, maybe you're looking for better returns, maybe you're trying to consolidate portfolios or spread out your portfolio. There's a lot of different scenarios depending on your unique situation. You definitely want to consider 1031 exchange. Now, as I promised, I've created an entirely free ebook around 1031 exchanges. It goes into most of the nitty-gritty details. Again, always check with your tax pro consultant as well, or CPA. If you'd like to get 1031 exchange ebook, simply sign up for my newsletter, which is in the description of this video below. And by doing so, I will reply back to you personally with a copy of the 1031 ebook. And you'll also get access to my newsletter, which provides off-market properties, a lot of updates on the Cambridge and Somerville market, both from a sales and rental side, as well as regulation changes that can affect both investment properties and primary residence. Anyways, I hope you guys found this video really helpful. If you have questions, you can always email me at sage, S-A-G-E, at cambridgesage.com, or you can shoot me a text or call at 617-833-7457. Either way, please subscribe, please like, and I'll see you guys next time.